Hey bookmarks and bookworms, welcome back to the channel and welcome to Bookmas Day 4, where I'm going to be telling you all about the best historical fiction and magical realism books that I read in 2023. Just to recap Bookmas so far, on day 1 we started off with my December TBR. On Bookmas Day 2, that was for my members only and that was my November reading wrap-up. On day 3 I gave you my most anticipated new releases coming out in 2024. And so we're on to the best books of 2023 segment of Bookmas. Coming out over the next days and weeks will be my favourite contemporary reads of 2023, my favourite crime reads, my favourite literary reads, and so there is so much coming up in Bookmas. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel for more, and if you would like access to extra videos from me every month, the sign up link will be in the description box below. So with that, let's get into the video by rolling the Bookmas intro. So I have 8 books to talk to you about today. 4 are historical fiction and 4 are magical realism. I'm going to alternate 1 historical fiction, then 1 magical realism, and they're not in any particular order, just because my ordered best books of the year list will be coming out in a video very shortly. So, starting with The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. This was my very first John Boyne novel, and I read this last month as part of my Reading Books Recommended to Me by AI video. This book is set against the backdrop of 20th century Catholic Ireland, with the repression of homosexuality and the stigma of unwed mothers, and we expand right the way up to the 21st century, so encapsulating the AIDS pandemic as well. And we follow the life of one man called Cyril Avery. He is our protagonist. We follow him right from childhood all the way up till his death. And he was a wonderful, wonderful protagonist to follow. He had so much, he was so humble and afraid and insecure, but at the same time had so much love and empathy for other people. His biological mother appeared at various different points throughout the novel, but neither Cyril nor his biological mother knowing the significance of who the other person was. So when Cyril is working for the Irish government, his mother works in the tea rooms, and they interact. They meet up several times after, and I just thought that was such a beautiful thread of the plot that weaved throughout the entire narrative, and I really looked forward to those moments where his biological mother would pop up and to see the interesting places that she popped up in, because she popped up in the most unlikely of places. At one point she was helping dispose of a body in Amsterdam, at another point she was inside a chapel in a hospital, and so there was this wonderful, almost cat and mouse, but a beautiful, non-threatening, I guess, cat and mouse of who was going to find each other first, and were these two people going to understand the significance of who the other person was ever during the entirety of this novel, or were they going to always remain strangers and not know the significance of the other person? So Cyril has a strained, very difficult relationship with his adopted parents, who never really fully embrace him as part of their family and always let him live with and reinforce to him the narrative that he is a baby from an unwed mother and therefore is not wanted. And then that just continues to snowball as the narrative of his life, when he as a homosexual in the 20th century is, you know, having sex with strangers in parks because there was no open way to be intimate as men. In that time period, it was illegal. Gay men were being beaten up inside public toilets because that was another place where gay men would congregate to have sex. And so this kind of cloud of fear and shame hung over Cyril's life, the majority of his life, if not all of it. And it really was a beautiful demonstration and love story, I guess, to those men who lived this and continue perhaps to live this in different realms and in different ways, but especially to the men who grew up in Catholic Ireland, who lived in Catholic Ireland and who suffered but at the hands of Catholic Ireland, and the repression and the fear and the shame that was associated with all of that, and I believe still exists to some levels to this day. So I thoroughly encourage you to pick this up. This was a masterclass in exceptional storytelling. John Boyne is an author that I have read several of the books by and have been blown away by not only his versatility as an author, but also his sensitivity as an author. The writing is first class. I cannot fault it. The plotting was brilliant, the pacing. This is a very, very long novel at over 500 pages, but you just fly through it. I can say the same about similar novels of John Boyne that I've picked up since The Heart's Invisible Furies, and they all have this real artistry to them and this real deep understanding of narratives and people and novels and how to make a story function as it should. And so I encourage you all to pick up this book. It was absolutely sublime. Going on to When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro. This I read way back in March as part of my reading all of Kazuo Ishiguro's novels video, which I shall leave in the description box below if you have yet to check that out. This was the winner of that video. It was head and shoulders above all of the other books that I read for that video. This is a 5-star wonderful piece of character work. We follow Christopher Banks from a child running around his garden in Hong Kong with his childhood best friend playing detectives, and we follow him all the way up to then an adult as he is in London, and he is a now detective in his own right, but he has this yearning and this need to go back to Hong Kong and find out what happened to his parents and potentially solve the disappearance of his parents. And so there is this real sense of nostalgia and memory, very reminiscent of a lot of Kazuo Ishiguro's novels, and this sense of an almost unreliability to not only the character but to the writing itself. So at one point we're in a series of subterranean tunnels, and Christopher is pursuing a house where he believes his parents are being held, and in the tunnels he comes across the childhood best friend, who is now also an adult, but who is very much dying, who has been a victim of war and is on his way to death. And Christopher and him have a kind of interchange, and Christopher ends up picking him up and taking him with him. And this whole time in the tunnels, you get a sense of this etherealness, the dreamlike state that Christopher's in, you're in, and the writing is putting you and sinking you into that moment of, what is going on here? Is this a dream? Is Christopher now this unreliable narrator? What is going on here? And that is the magical realist element of this, as Ishiguro is intentionally misleading the reader to make them join Christopher in this almost hallucinogenic state. And I really, really enjoyed the playfulness of that. Ishiguro's writing, I feel, would be best described as a subtle, humble, quiet, but also comforting style of writing, with an almost insidious undertone of something menacing that you can't quite see as the reader, but you feel like there's something else there going on. It's an undertone of malice, like something is being held back from the reader. And that mystery element is one, obviously adds to the curiosity of a reader and makes us be drawn in by this mystery element, but also invests us in the narrative so deeply that you really feel like I was there in the narrative with Christopher Banks, and he is one of my standout characters of 2023, that you can say his name and I'm instantly back there with that person who could be a fully fleshed, real human being. And that's something I absolutely love about the magic of Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a novel that reminds me why I read. It is haunting and has left me many a time with scenes that I go back to and I ponder, and I'm back in that moment in the tunnels or in the house with Christopher, and it is just wonderful to discover those books as a reader that reminds us why we read. Up next, we are heading back to historical fiction with a little magical realist twist. This is Victoria Mackenzie's For Thy Great Pain Have Mercy on My Little Pain, which I am surprised I remembered that title straight off the bat in one go, in one take, because that is the longest book title I have read so far this year. It is ridiculously long and even comically long when put into the context that this novel is only 140 pages and 10% of that is its title. So this is the first of 2 debut authors that I've included in this video, and that is pretty good odds. That means that a quarter of the books on this Best Books of the Year video are by debut authors. That's pretty impressive. So the inspiration behind this book is a real-life manuscript that was written by a woman called Julianne in a French monastery, and Julianne basically had experienced a lot of trauma in life, and so ran away to this monastery and asked to be bricked up, which means that she is bricked into a room, and the only interaction she has is with a woman who comes and delivers her food, and also with passers-by in the street who speak to her and ask her to pray for them, and they tell her their fears and their hopes and their dreams and their worries through the grate that they can access from the street level as Julianne sits in her sort of walled tomb, basically. So we have 2 timelines going on, one following Julianne in this tomb and another one following Marjorie. Marjorie is a woman who has been blessed with the gift of fertility and huge amounts of fertility, but also at the same time, because of the time period this is in, that is also a very dangerous gift to have, because you have child after child after child, and she is pregnant yet again, and there is no guarantee that going through birth that she's going to live this time. Like, it is a very life and death situation. Life at the end of giving birth is not guaranteed, certainly not in this time period, and so she is very much in fear of her life, thinking that potentially this baby could be the end for her in terms of death in childbirth. And so Marjorie runs. She leaves her husband, she leaves her children, and she runs, and the place that she runs to is Julianne. And so that is where the stories of these 2 women converge, as Julianne hands the manuscript over to Marjorie, and the manuscript that she has been working on during her days and months and years enclosed in this tomb. And so this whole narrative regarding this manuscript and how it came to be preserved has all been imagined by the author. I was so impressed with the writing of this book. It was beautifully written, really well plotted and paced, especially as these are 2 elements that debut authors can often fall into the pitfall of. The writing felt very fluid and very natural and very accomplished. And unlike other debut authors that I've come across, Victoria Mackenzie felt in control. She had her power in her writing, and she was in control of this narrative, and at no point did my confidence in her as an author wane. She held it together throughout, both narratives successfully interwoven together, well, just perfect. So now we're heading back over to magical realism, and this is Laona by Tessa Mosfegh. This is my 4th Mosfegh book, and it is one of my favourites. No one does character work, I feel, as well as Mosfegh. She is one hell of a talented writer. All of her characters, and bearing in mind I read this book way back in January, all of her characters I can still remember. They aren't lost, they don't become blurred. I remember them all distinctly, and I can't say that about some of the books that I read last month, let alone a book that I read almost a year ago. So if that doesn't speak to the power of this woman's skill and craftsmanship in her character work, I don't know what else will. But because I read this way back in January, it means I have mentioned this book time and time and time again on this channel in my Q1 favourite books of the year, Q2, Q3 favourite books of the year, as well as in my January wrap-up. So I don't want to go over old ground. I will leave all the videos in which I've spoken about Laona in the description box below for those of you who have not watched them and want to hear my more extended thoughts and feelings on this book. But just know it was absolute 5-star, magical realist elements, perfect historical fiction narrative, perfect, beautiful, talented writer with characters to just root for and love and adore. So next we're going back to historical fiction, and this is coming from Alison Weir. This is The Sixth Wife, following the life of Catherine Parr, who was Henry VIII's 6th and final wife. We follow Catherine from her childhood all the way up to her death, which includes 4 marriages. Henry VIII was actually her 3rd husband, And as well as being a really enjoyable insight into Catherine Parr, this was actually a really different perspective on Henry VIII, a man who was very loving towards Catherine Parr, who defended her and protected her from people both in Parliament and in court who wanted her dead. And he really had an emotional connection to Catherine Parr that was far from the tyrant that I often see him as in regard to some of his previous wives, and the fact that he, beheaded them, divorced them, etc., etc., and otherwise treated people very badly. And this was a refreshing, different take on a man who otherwise has a pretty bad reputation for the type of character he was. Catherine Parr led an incredible life, and far beyond being Henry's wife and Queen of England. The things that you get to know about her life through this novel, outside of maybe what she's most famous for, was wonderful. She embodies so many feminine qualities that I admire so much. I found her inspirational. It was the most wonderful book to read over this summer, honouring a woman that really I had no knowledge of, but now have this immense amount of respect and admiration for. And I just so appreciate Alison Weir for bringing this character and her story to life. And I encourage you all, if you haven't, to go and check out Alison Weir's 6 Tudor Queens series. I certainly will be diving into more of her books going forward. Down to the last 3 now, and we're heading back to the magical realism genre. This is Wayward by Amelia Hart, and this is the second of the 2 debut authors that I'm including in this list. This, to me, is a better version of Evie Wyld's The Bass Rock. It takes a very similar structure in that we follow 3 women across 3 different time periods, all connected by place. And the place this time is Wayward Cottage, where each of them run away to escape the abuse they are suffering at the hands of the men in their lives. Again, this debut author misses those debut pitfalls like pacing and plotting issues, and she does not allow one of the 3 storylines to overshadow or overpower any of the others. They're all balanced, they all have their own personality and feel to them, and even writing style, I would say, to them. And that, I think, is very difficult, and it shows a talent and a mastery of what she's doing. And really noticeably, all 3 of the storylines could stand alone. They all make sense on their own, but equally they all make sense interwoven together into this one novel, Wayward. So I would say if you're a fan of Stacey Hall's writing, you will really get on with this novel. So far, I think this book has been a bit of a slow burn in the booktube community. I have seen it on some people's radar, and I think people are slowly picking it up now, especially in the autumn-winter months of 2023. But I read it way back in March, April, when I heard nobody else talking about it, and I'm glad to see that it has this sort of little burst of energy and people picking it up around these winter months. And I hope to encourage you guys now to go and pick this up for yourselves and try it if this sounds like a book for you. And we're back off to historical fiction. This is The Last Kingdom by Bernard Cornwell. Now, The Last Kingdom on Netflix is one of my all-time favourite TV shows. I have watched all 5 series at least twice, if not 3 times. I absolutely adore the characters, the stories. It has everything I love, which is a real hero's journey. There's survival, there's love, there's battles, there's loss, there is betrayal, there is romance, there's everything that you love. There is friendship that just goes to the bitter end and beyond death, and it just has so much meaning to it. And I think it really has elements of what life is about, and kind of like struggling through hardship and coming together and overcoming, I guess, the obstacles and the defeats. And it has everything that I absolutely love in my characters as well. So here we follow Uhtred, who is our hero. He was born a Dane but grew up as an Anglo-Saxon Christian, and it basically follows Britain as it goes from a series of disconnected kingdoms to basically a united England. And we follow Alfred, the King of Wessex, and his bloodline, who have Uhtred as their right-hand man and best warrior, to basically fight their way through the kingdoms and fight their way through the invading Danes. to create a united England. Now, that obviously doesn't happen in one book. I very much included the Netflix series in all of that, but Cornwall's series is a massive series of books, which I've only read the first of. I'm not sure if I will continue necessarily with the books, just because I still think I prefer the TV show, but it was certainly nice to revisit those classic scenes from a different perspective, from a writing perspective, and love it just as much in this new form as I did when I was watching it. And lastly then, we are going to our final remaining magical realism novel. This is Lone Women by Victor Lavelle. Another one that I haven't heard many people speak about, but I think will grow in popularity once it's spoken about more and more. This author clearly understands the elements that you need to have in storytelling. You can pretty much plot the hero's journey in this. There are some elements where he kind of loses it slightly, but for the most part, this author understands storytelling from the perspective of the hero's journey. And so we open as a woman has literally burnt down her family home with her parents inside it, takes a trunk and gets on a train and goes on a journey basically into the middle of the Midwest, where the government are packaging up parcels of land very cheaply for people to basically go and re-inhabit and regenerate the land, start making profit off it, and then you can then keep the land, giving you financial security and I guess domestic security. But the trunk that our protagonist is carrying has something inside it, and we don't know as the reader what is inside it, but the protagonist clearly does, because she is intensely afraid of what is inside this trunk. It appears to have a life of its own, because it kind of moves and makes noise. And so because our protagonist is fearful of it, we assume what's inside is malign. Now, what's inside the trunk is revealed towards the very end of the novel, which for me, unfortunately, was anticlimactic when the reveal finally happened, because it could have been just the most magical thing ever that pops out of that suitcase, but the suspense that had been built throughout the novel of this meant that I feel like it was potentially always going to be anticlimactic, because it was never going to be as big as the author had built it up to be in the head of the reader and also of the protagonist. So that slightly let it down in my estimations, but this was a very strong narrative, very strong and compelling storytelling. I haven't really told you a lot about this novel. There is far more detail that I could have gone into. I have done another video on Lone Women that I will leave in the description box, links below, but I still remember this story and I read it back in June. So this really is a story that will stick with you and really says so much more than I could possibly say in this short 4-minute or so description of this book. So that takes me to the end of all of the best historical fiction books I read in 2023 and the best magical realism books I read in 2023. A lot of these books actually had historical fiction and magical realist elements in them. I feel like historical fiction and magical realism are two genres that blend really well together, and when used together can actually enhance the original genre of the book. So if you have historical fiction and add a little bit of magical realism, it just seems to elevate the book, and vice versa as well. So this was Bookmas Day 4. Bookmas Day 5 will be my best literary fiction of 2023, so definitely subscribe for that video. And Bookmas Day 6 is all of the new release translated fiction reads that I'm excited to read in 2024. So with that, I shall catch you in the next Bookmas video, guys. Until then, happy reading.